Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks is New Guitar Day and the guitar in question is right here. This is a made in Japan Fender Jaguar. Now, the Jaguar is a close cousin of the Jazzmaster, which is a much more popular model, but when these came out in the early 60s, they really weren't a hit at all. Now, the Jazzmaster was Leo Fender's attempt to capture the jazz playing market, and when that didn't really work, he then developed this to try again. And this didn't really work either. So shortly after Fender was sold to CBS, it was discontinued. Of course, it's been reissued in the years since. Now, the Jaguar, when it came out, was kind of the top of the line guitar that Fender made. It was the most expensive by a long way, and all of the switching options just gave you ultimate versatility over how you wanted the guitar to sound. So down here, these three switches are, the two of them are on-off switches for the neck and the bridge pickup. The third one is what's called the strangle switch, which is basically a high-pass capacitor. So you click it in and it thins the low end out, and then you get a volume and tone control. But you also get this whole separate circuit up here called the rhythm circuit, selectable by this toggle switch here. And this basically gives you volume and tone, but for the neck pickup only. Now, the difference between the volume and tone down the bottom and up the top is that up here, the tone pot is a 50k pot. All of the other pots in the guitar are 1 meg. So there's a lot of kind of very sort of brilliant high end in this guitar, as you would expect from using 1 meg pots with single coil pickups. But that 50k tone pot is kind of like having the tone pot down the bottom rolled almost all the way off before you've even touched it. So going to the rhythm circuit, it's just a neck pickup and it's much darker. So you can switch this guitar in a whole lot of different ways. It's very versatile. It was firmly aimed at the surf market when it was released in 1962, I think. The British invasion hasn't happened at that point, and surf music was king over in America. So this was marketed at the popular music of the day, but again, it didn't really stick. So I've been after an offset for a while because I've never owned an offset guitar, and to me the Jaguar just seemed to tick more boxes than the Jazzmaster did. Now when I got this guitar, it sounded wonderful. But there's a few things about it that I knew I was going to want to change. I always mod guitars when I buy them, so that's not unexpected. But to me, there was a couple of things about this guitar that were bugging me slightly. The first was how it sounded. Now, as I said, with 1 meg pots, in the normal circuit at least, Jaguars have a very defined, sparkly top end on them. And this guitar had all of that high end. But from watching lots and lots of demos of vintage Jaguars on YouTube, there was one thing this guitar which was missing, which was essentially like an upper mid bite. There's an aggression to these guitars that this one was missing in its stock form. These pickups are kind of Strat-like to a point, but they do have this sort of metal claw around, which serves a similar purpose to something like the base plate on a Fender Tele bridge pickup. It kind of reflects the magnet up and just makes it a little bit more focused and bitey. And this guitar just didn't quite match up. It had the top end, but it was lacking some of that bite. So I knew I was going to want to make some changes to get a bit more bite into this guitar. But the other two things I wanted to change were kind of known issues with the Jaguar. But of course, there's aftermarket parts nowadays that can make that a lot better. So the first sort of playability thing I wanted to change was because of the low break angle over the bridge, the strings don't have much downward pressure on the bridge, and it's a common thing with Jaguars that the strings will always jump out of the saddles, and that I was absolutely finding that. Even with my very thick strings, the top E, playing with fingers, it would just straight out the saddle every time. So that was annoying me. But by far and away the most irritating thing about this guitar was the stock Fender trem system. It was very, very noisy. The tuning stability was actually really quite good, but it was clangy, it was rattly, and, well, I'll show you here. So yeah, really not particularly quiet. And when you're plugged into a belting tube amp and using your trem on a sort of sustaining chord at the end of a passage, and all you can hear is clang, 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 really quite irritating. So I decided to do a complete overhaul on this guitar and bring it up to what one viewer of this channel once described as perky spec. Now, lots of those things are kind of cosmetic, really. So I put some original Kluson tuners on here, some proper ones. I even swapped out the string tree for this sort of Callahan button type that's on the top of this guitar now. And inside, this guitar used kind of very small ceramic capacitors. The originals would have used the big disc ceramic capacitors. I put paper and oil in here. I just like paper and oil capacitors. And also it used plastic wires Now, plastic wires are fine. They sound, I think, pretty much identical to the cloth-covered wires that Fender would use back in the day. I just prefer cloth-covered wires. So I did a complete rewire of this guitar to the 1962 schematic that Fender put out using cloth-covered wire and paper and oil capacitors. So not strictly vintage correct on the capacitor front, but I just like paper and oil. So that takes us on to some of the more big ticket items in this guitar then. The first big thing I changed was the pickups. Now, I did a lot of reading, and a fair few people make aftermarket Jaguar pickups, but on all the forums, people who own vintage Jaguars and reissues that they're trying to get to sound as close to their originals as possible tend to come back to one company. Unfortunately for me, they're based here in the UK, and that is Mark at Mojo Pickups. Now, I've got a fair bit of experience with Mark. He makes wonderful stuff, and he owns an original Jaguar, which he can side-by-side A/B tests to ones he makes. So a lot of people say these are pretty much as close to the originals as you can possibly get. I'm sure some other manufacturers get close and they're just different flavours of the same thing, but certainly being UK based was very helpful for me. So the Mojo Jaguar pickups are what I have in this guitar now. But when it comes to the bridge and the trem system, there's not too many aftermarket kind of hardware companies for offsets. Mastery is probably the best known. But in the end, I went with Descendent, based over in the States, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, on the bridge, you can adjust everything about it. You can adjust the height, the tilt of it, you can adjust the intonation on every single saddle, which you can't do on something like the Mastery because you get blocks with just 2 screws for 3 strings. And you can adjust the individual height of each saddle too. So when I put this bridge on, I got it completely dialed in and it was perfect. But the G string was just starting to choke a little bit up top. So I just raised that one saddle up, problem solved. So I'm a big fan of this Descendent bridge. But the real magic of Descendent hardware is the trem system here. Because to solve the break angle issue over the bridge, it's kind of impossible because the trem's set so far back and you're kind of stuck with this very long travel up over quite a shallow bridge. But what Descendent has done is put some grooves in the bridge, and inside you get some plates. As stock, it ships with 2 of them, and essentially it kind of pads the mechanism down so it can go underneath the sort of wood level of the guitar, and the strings can come up through the grooves and give you a much bigger break angle over the bridge. Now, I found that with my super thick strings, I used 12 through 64, it was just resting on the top of the grooves when I was using both bridge plates in there. So I'm in kind of the one position. You get vintage and then 2 levels of drop. I'm in like the first level of drop, but it works fantastic and sounds wonderful. And unlike the Fender bridge, completely quiet. So I'm a huge fan of this Descendent stuff, super easy to install. It was great dealing with Descendent as a company. They were absolutely wonderful in getting back to me, telling me which particular hardware I'd need for this guitar and all of that. So cannot recommend Descendent stuff highly enough. So what I'm going to do today, folks, and I'll be honest, I did shoot this video yesterday, is I shot a couple of things with this guitar in its completely stock form through a couple of different amps, one clean, one dirty. I then did all of the modifications and shot the same things through the same amps to see what difference all the changes in one great big dollop have made to the sound of this guitar. Does it make it quieter? Does it stop the string popping out to the top E string? And does it make it sound a little bit more bitey and closer to the vintage originals? So I'm going to show you that today, folks. I did match the setup in terms of action and pickup height, which might not necessarily be exactly what I want for these particular pickups, because every set of pickups and guitar hardware needs its own kind of distinct setup. So I matched it for as close an A/B test as I can, but ultimately I might go back and change a few bits after the fact. But I just wanted to show you what going from kind of stock MIJ spec to so-called Perkins spec with a lot of fancy boutique gear can make to a guitar, because I'm very, very happy with this now and I want to show you. So without further ado, folks, here we go. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath, let me know what you were hearing today. Did you prefer this guitar in its stock form or my modified form? I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks down in the comments section. Now I think for me, having listened to the audio back just now, the changes I made were exactly what I was needing for this guitar. It now has more of that bite to it without sacrificing any of the top end. Now I think with these pickups, the neck pickup is pretty close between the MIJ and the Mojo pickup here. And I think when going to the rhythm circuit and it kind of takes all the top end off the guitar, you can almost not really tell them apart. I think there's a bigger difference in the bridge pickup. This has much more bite to it. I think it's a little bit hotter because into the clean amp today was kind of pushing a little bit more level, and it's a little bit tighter in the low end as well, which again kind of matches what I hear in vintage Jaguars. But again, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I think this now sounds a little bit closer to the sort of the vintage spec Jag that I was chasing after with this. And I really am blown away by this Descendent hardware. It's super quiet. You can really dial a setup in to perfection, and it's just made this guitar so much more usable and playable. But as always, folks, just my thoughts. So let me know yours underneath. I love hearing from you guys on all this sort of stuff. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a huge difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.